I'm happy to start that one. So it's a good question because you can't legislate or put laws in place to stop people from wanting to behave in certain ways. But one thing that the law can do is it can encourage certain behaviors. So I live in North Carolina, and the South is a different animal for a lot of reasons, but I think particularly integration in schools, for example. One of the ways that laws make segregation in schools easy is it allows us to allow school assignment to be tethered to neighborhood, right? So when you have a system of laws and policies that you know are going to facilitate segregation or make it easier to segregate, then it caters to people's desires, I would say. And so one way that we can at least take steps towards addressing the problem that you've raised is to ensure that our laws, at a minimum, do not facilitate segregation. So in the South, one of the things that was an outgrowth of school desegregation litigation there was county-based school districts. And so what that did is it untied school attendance from the municipality or city in which one lived. And so you had a larger territorial base in which to devise school assignment plans. It also made it harder for white flight because now you can't escape integrated schools by moving to the next suburb or city over. You're going to have to move counties away in order to escape school integration. And so this is just one example, but I think that a lot of our laws make it easy to facilitate private choices regarding segregation. And so one of the challenges is to change our laws that do facilitate private choices towards segregation. If it were up to me, education is my big issue. I would overturn the case that allows for people to send their kids to private schools, right? That scares a lot of people when I say that, but it would require everyone to opt in, and it would take away a tremendous avenue of white flight from the public school system. So I think that's a starter. I mean, in terms of enacting laws that don't facilitate segregative choices.
And then Erika, I just wanted to say, I was actually struck by your comments and the data that you provided around middle class Black families still living in poor neighborhoods, which is an interesting phenomenon, really consistent with what we're talking about here around even if you have the economic means to make a different choice, Black families are still in poor neighborhoods, right? Some of it by choice and some of it, by, whatever construct of your city that you live in. But it's an interesting phenomenon still.
Yeah.
That economics isn't driving necessarily that choice.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
On the school front in Chicago, I think some interesting things that have been happening. So one example I'll lift up is Jenner and Ogden. So here in Chicago, this idea that there are very few schools that are high quality that I'm going to send my kid to, and if we're overcrowded, then we should build a new school. I think really has continued to promote and perpetuate segregation in a lot of ways because it's about certain communities saying we're going to build another school for us. And if we're talking about how housing segregation works, it often is going to be racialized. But what they did in Jenner Ogden, with one of the schools being really overcrowded, the school that was more affluent, more white, they actually began to work out a partnership with a neighboring school that was underutilized. It was majority African American. But instead of saying can we have that building and y'all can go somewhere else, right? But this idea of how can we work together to create a system that might work for all of us? And so the community and the leadership of the two schools really went through kind of a painful process, a long process to really begin to come together as a community and craft a solution that had everyone in mind. Right? And so the ability to come together and name solutions that really take in the interest of all parties and all stakeholders. And so what they're doing is they're actually going to merge the two schools together, and it will have the effect of integrating the schools and also providing more resources and meeting needs and providing a lot of solutions. Now, I'll sort of give a word of caution because a very similar narrative was said about National Teachers Academy, that this would integrate the schools. I think the thing to note here is that instead of the communities working together to talk about what works for all of us, we really were kind of talking about a takeover, right? So we want to use this building, and then the district sort of supported the decision. We want to use this building as a high school, and some of the kids can come, or the kids that are currently there can come. We're not going to be worried about the kids that, you know, would come up through the neighborhood and matriculate in. And so it was a push that the narrative at one point was about integration, but what we always said is that it lacked equity. It lacked attention to this idea of what do we collectively as a community need. And so when I think about what we can do, so there is the macro work for sure. So when you are in places of policy, how are you thinking about the impact? Every choice we make, burdens and benefits flow. Who are they flowing to? How are they flowing to? And if they don't flow the way that we want them to, what can we do on the front end to really think about better and more inclusive decisions? And then on the individual, when inequity is at my front door, what will I do about it? How will I talk to others about it? Will I just go along because in the moment it seems to meet my interest? Or will I challenge and push? And I think that was really something that was called to attention when we were talking about schools. So nothing is more precious than our children, right? And this idea of wanting a quality school, but schools aren't quality just because they're new, they're quality because of what we put into them. And so, and the resources that we put into them, and the time and the care, and that's something we can build. And so really sort of taking a step back and asking, how do we build that for all of our kids, and really define all of our kids in a much more expansive way, I think is really important to taking those steps to get there.
Yeah, I would just add that looking at things from sort of the macro standpoint and everything, it may look like we haven't made a lot of progress in everything, but if you take something like the Fair Housing Act and the impact that that has had on individuals who have been discriminated and complained, it's been massive. And there are ways, and you can see it in the way people talk, the way they speak, the way governments talk and speak. These laws do make a big difference. They may not solve the problem, and we may not ultimately look a lot different than maybe we did 40 or 50 years ago. But in individual lives, these laws can make a very, very big difference.
And actually, to your point on that, Michael, I would add, even in the context of the civil rights law, and which from a hiring perspective allowed for minorities and women to actually seek employment opportunities, that now what we ended up seeing as we moved into the 70s, into the 80s, where they were able to garner that experience and then use that to then go out and start businesses. And that's really kind of indicative even of the CEO and co-founder of our firm, you know, who worked at a major Wall Street investment bank and then ended up co-founding and starting an investment bank himself. And so kind of that opportunity to be able to have those opportunities, develop the experience, and then to go out and start businesses, and small businesses really drive the U.S. economy anyway. To be able to start that, you know, really impacts kind of all of the areas that we're talking about, both from an education and housing perspective, and how it is that factors into the overall fabric of a community.